We begin the day in the U.S. where the days could be numbered for TikTok. On Wednesday, lawmakers in the U.S. House of Representatives overwhelmingly passed a bill that could ban the social media platform if it refuses to sever all ties to the Chinese government. Lawmakers, both Republicans and Democrats, have raised concerns about China's ability to access TikTok user data via the platform's Chinese parent company, ByteDance, saying that this could pose a threat to national security. Now, the legislation now goes to the U.S. Senate, where it faces an uncertain future. However, U.S. President Biden says if presented with the bill, he will sign it into law.
TikTok's future in the United States is in jeopardy. The U.S. House of Representatives has given its owner, ByteDance, an ultimatum: divest from the app within 6 months or risk a ban across all U.S. devices. Approved by the House, the bill now goes to the Senate, where its fate is uncertain. It's a rare occasion where a piece of legislation has strong bipartisan support, as well as opposition.
Any ban on TikTok is not just banning the freedom of expression. You are literally causing huge harm to our national economy. We have small business owners that are here and small business owners from across the country that use TikTok.
An estimated 170 million TikTok users are based in the U.S. Its reach is part of the reason why intelligence officials are concerned. The head of the FBI and CIA have warned that China could use it to influence U.S. public opinion, and that it could compel ByteDance to hand over data on its users. There have been no reports of Beijing having done this, but the possibility of it happening has prompted lawmakers to take action. ByteDance denies any connection to the Chinese government. China is warning the U.S. that the ban will come back to bite it. President Biden, who joined the app last month, says he will sign the ban if it passes a Senate and ends up on his desk.
Well, TikTok responded immediately to the U.S. House's vote, calling the legislation an outright ban. Here's House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries.
I don't support a ban on TikTok. The legislation did not ban TikTok. It's simply a divestiture of TikTok so that this social media platform can be owned by an American company that would protect the data and the privacy of the American consumer from malignant foreign interests like the Chinese Communist Party.
Well, for more now, I'm joined by Lindsay Gorman. She's a senior fellow for emerging technologies at the Alliance for Securing Democracy. She is in Washington, D.C., from where she joins me tonight. It's good to see you again. Let's just talk about what happened today. The U.S. House passing this legislation. Do you foresee the U.S. Senate doing the same?
Yeah, it's good to see you too. And I think the U.S. Senate will be definitely less of a foregone conclusion than the House. It might take a little bit more time, but there are some encouraging signals. Today, the chairman and ranking member of the of the Senate Intelligence Committee came out in support of the bill. The Biden administration has said that the president will sign the bill if it passes the Senate. So there does seem to be a groundswell of support, even as you noted, from people like Representative Jeffries, who do not support a ban on TikTok. This is a measured response, and so I think while we'll see what happens, there is a good chance that this makes it through.
Yeah, and U.S. President Biden says that he will sign the legislation into law if it makes it to his desk. And you know that struck me when I heard that today, because the White House just a month ago joined TikTok. How do you explain that? I mean, that sounds like you're talking out of both sides of your mouth there, Mr. President.
It sounds that way a bit, but I would say that it wasn't that the White House joined TikTok. It was the Biden campaign that joined TikTok, which I think to many reads as a distinction without a difference. But in terms of federal law on these boundaries, it is somewhat different in that this is a campaign activity, not an executive branch activity. But what I'm heartened by is that despite the campaign being on TikTok, it does seem like the administration is still willing to pursue aggressive action to resolve the national security concerns there.
But Lindsay, don't you agree? It looks even worse, though, for an official campaign to join TikTok as opposed to the White House itself? I mean, we hear all the, since 2016 about foreign interference in U.S. elections. And here you have, Biden joining TikTok, saying that he'll sign a law to ban it if he gets it.
Yeah, I don't think it's great that the Biden campaign is on TikTok, despite the fact that the administration clearly recognizes it as a national security threat. I'm hopeful that the campaign, like many Americans, will be able to continue to use the platform once these national security issues are resolved through a divestiture, because it's clearly a popular platform. It's clearly something that political candidates want to use to reach voters. We just have to deal with these national security concerns so we can carry on.
Yeah, and TikTok belongs to a Chinese company, ByteDance. Chinese companies, we know, are required by law in China to supply the government with any and all information if it is requested. This is really what Congress finds disturbing, isn't it?
That's right, and that's part of it, though. I think the other part of it is it's important to remember that in China, there really is no such thing as a private company. In the United States and in Europe, in other democracies, we're accustomed to seeing the separation between companies and the government. In China, ultimately, all companies are implements of the state. And so, yes, we're talking about the data risk. But really, I think what's coming up even more clearly now in this conversation this past week is the influence of propaganda and the ability to target American voters and voters around the world with content to influence their views on candidates, on elections, and on public opinion.
What you're talking about is maybe subliminal psych ops being executed or aimed at the American public by a company that happens to, be owned by a Chinese company that answers to the Chinese Communist Party. I mean, that's a huge deal when you think of it that way, right?
That's exactly right. And it's not a theoretical risk. I mean, we saw in the United States very clearly what Russia did using Facebook. And Russia did not have a controlling interest. It had no ownership of Facebook. It was still able to succeed. Imagine if Russia had owned Facebook back in 2016 and its in its actions in Europe even before 2016. And we already do have evidence of China interested in meddling in U.S. elections, particularly when a Chinese dissident has been on the ballot. So this is not a theoretical risk, and it's just too great a tool to hand over to an autocratic power whose interests are degrading the U.S. position in the world.
Well, what about these U.S. big tech companies, platforms? I'm thinking of Facebook and Twitter used to be X. I mean, they still exist. These are U.S. companies, but do we have regulation in place to ensure that they are not used by, for example, Russia, again, to influence the outcome of an election? I mean, it's easy to point our finger at China, but are we looking in the mirror?
I think a lot of people would say that we're not looking in the mirror enough, and they might be right. It's true that Facebook and Twitter and many of these platforms have taken major strides to crack down on foreign influence activity on their platforms. Every month or every couple of months, we hear about a takedown of Chinese accounts or Russian accounts on Facebook, on Twitter, coordinated inauthentic behavior that is rooted out by the platforms. And that's encouraging. I think there's still definitely a threat there. But the key difference is that Mark Zuckerberg, as far as we know, is not taking orders from the Chinese Communist Party.
Yeah, that's a very good point to make. You and I have talked over the last couple of years about attempts to regulate social media. What do you make with this legislation? I mean, this legislation was presented, just a couple of weeks ago, a few weeks ago? I mean, it's made it to the vote in the House very quickly. Is this political Washington waking up to the responsibilities that you and I talked about 2 or 3 years ago that seemed to have been neglected in Washington?
In some sense, yes. I don't think anyone sees this as a bill that's a panacea to solve all the problems of social media. It is very, very narrowly targeted to dealing with TikTok, ByteDance, and potentially other foreign adversary-controlled autocratic apps. So this is not wide-scale social media regulation, let's be clear. That said, I do think this question on TikTok has been brewing for a very long time, and that's driving some of the expediency, I think, that we're seeing with which this bill has been able to pass the House and received a 50-0 vote out of committee in the manner of about a week. This was a bipartisan initiative, one of the signature initiatives coming out of the House Select Committee on the CCP. And so I think because we're in an election year, there's that extra added urgency where we want to do something together. We want to do something bipartisan. And the reality is people are starting to use TikTok to talk about the 2024 election in the U.S. And that's a problem that needs to be solved right away.
Very good point. Lindsay Gorman with the Alliance for Securing Democracy in Washington, D.C. Lindsay, it's always good talking with you. We appreciate the analysis. Thank you. Well, for more now, I'm joined by Dan Ives. He's the managing director at Wedbush Securities. He's a tech analyst on Wall Street. He joins me from New York City. Dan, it's good to have you with us. Let me just start by asking for your reaction to what the U.S. House of Representatives has voted on today.
I think it's a slippery slope. I mean, when you start this, and there's First Amendment issues, and then the concern is where does it go? I mean, we still believe only a 25% chance this actually gets banned. But this is something U.S.-China Cold Tech War definitely adds fuel to the fire.
How likely is it that Chinese authorities are or will be in the future gathering data from TikTok users in the United States?
Look, I mean, CFIUS has been investigating this, and there's still nothing on that. And we saw the hearing last March. You know, if there's a backdoor to Beijing, you know, I think the view is that there likely is not. Mm-hmm. And obviously, TikTok's become so popular in the U.S. This really becomes I think, in my opinion, the start of what's going to be a Game of Thrones battle.
Well, kind of put us in the minds of the Chinese government, and what sort of data could be of use to China that people leave as digital traces on TikTok in the United States?
Look, I mean, of course, there's so much data. And look, if most government employees basically all can't really be on TikTok. And there's clearly, we'll call national security worries here. But the big issue is, if you go down this path, then what could happen even to some of the U.S. social media in terms of government dictating what they can or can't do? That's the biggest worry. I'm not saying that this is roses and champagne in terms of what's happening in Beijing. Mm-hmm. But if you ban TikTok, you go down a pretty dangerous route, in my opinion.
Well, what is the top threat to national security as seen on Capitol Hill in TikTok?
I don't think there's even a consensus there in terms of from national security. You could say data, consumer data, but it goes back to if there's no backdoor to Beijing, then there's no national security risk. And I think that's something from a ByteDance perspective, even if this was sold, let's just take that extreme path, they're never going to sell it with the source code. And I think that's why this is something that's going to play out, not just for months, but I believe years, you know, as this becomes a political football.
Yeah, the U.S. President, Joe Biden, has said that he will sign legislation if it is sent to him that would ban TikTok. It looks like the U.S. Senate may follow the U.S. House of Representatives. I mean, are you assuming that we're going to look at this legislation becoming law and a possible ban happening?
Yeah, we think only 25%. I mean, I'd be shocked if this actually hit the Senate floor. Mm-hmm. I think there's going to be a lot of debate there in terms of how as this goes through. And I can tell you from a lot of our Beltway contacts, it's really viewed right now as 25% chance that this actually ban goes through. But to get out the popcorn moment, definitely a lot of drama and soap opera ahead.
Dan Ives, tech analyst, joining us from Wall Street in the United States. Dan, thank you. We appreciate your analysis.